Welcome to another show on Africa. This week we speak to President of the African Development Bank, Donald Kaberuka. We get his views on development on the African continent. You get to have your say. And as always, we have Africa's top 10. You're watching the Africa Leadership Dialogues. I'm Julie Gichuru. Donald Kaberuka is the president of the African Development Bank. He's serving his second term as president of that institution, managing a $13 billion portfolio. Prior to this, between 1997 and 2005, Kaberuka served as the Minister of Finance and Economic Planning in Rwanda, where he assisted in the successful economic reconstruction of the country in the aftermath of the tragic genocide of 1994. Kaberuka has also had a distinguished career in banking, international trade and development. In his role as president of the African Development Bank, he has presided over a major redirection in the strategy for development and poverty reduction, placing increased emphasis on the private sector and on the importance of major infrastructure development, particularly roads, railways, power plants and communications, with emphasis on their role in promoting regional integration across the continent. Let's take a look at his insights into Africa. Well, thank you so much, Donald, for making time to be with the Africa Leadership Dialogues. It's an exciting time for the continent, but we still have so many challenges. In terms of the bank, focus seems to be on infrastructure. Tell us about what's going on at the moment. What is the bank engaged in, especially when it comes to the cross-border projects?
First of all, let me confirm what you are saying. This is a really exciting time for this continent, and I'll tell you why. If you compare the year 2000 and now, the GDP of African countries has gone up 5 times. If you adjust for inflation, it has tripled. Now, we still have many issues, but some of these numbers are unknown to the general public. However, no country in the world has been able to sustain this kind of economic growth, 7–8%, unless you overcome the obstacle of infrastructure, energy, connectivity, transport. That is the experience of countries like Indonesia and South Korea. At some point, South Korea was investing heavily in infrastructure and was able to sustain long period of economic growth. Indonesia at some point got stuck. And so what the bank is trying to do is to look at the number of obstacles and say, some of them are so important. We need to figure out how to resolve them quickly. And that's why in a country like yours, we're very big in infrastructure, energy, transport. And the second key issue there is that for a continent of 54 countries, some of them with such a small economic size, economic integration is a matter of life and death almost, because there is no way we can sustain this kind of performance unless we allow movement of people and capital.
It remains a challenge, and even in East Africa, where so much is being achieved, there's constant complaints about the bureaucracies and the red tape at the border. But let's talk about the projects now. And for instance, in East Africa, Ethiopia, the energy, the power, and now looking to ensure that Kenya is able to leverage that. I think the same thing in Central Africa as well. But when it comes to projects of this kind, where you're bringing governments together, telling them, let's sit at a table, let's work together, you know, how are you achieving this? Because it must be difficult.
It is complex, but it's doable. I think all the regions of Africa, except North Africa and Central Africa, good progress is being made. Now, the barriers are physical. You can do roads, or you can do electrical highways. But the non-tangibles, the paperwork, the bureaucracy, is a huge challenge. And if I give an example of your region, we have done recently a $300 million project to connect Kenya to Ethiopia, a highway, part of a bigger program. And that has brought down the cost of power in Kenya by 30%. I hope we can do more. We are now trying to do the same between Ethiopia and Djibouti, almost completed, a much smaller program. But those things demand that national power institutions function. The national utilities do their job. Same for highways. We can do a highway like I've done between Nairobi and Arusha, which I've financed. But I was telling some officials that last time I passed there was a pile of vehicles, totally unnecessary. Those things have to be dealt with, because at the end of the day, the purpose of the infrastructure is trade. And so if trade is hampered by these man-made issues, it's a huge problem. Now, it's complex, it's doable, but I think Africans must show a sense of urgency. We are doing it as if we have all the time in the world. We don't.
So there's the stumbling blocks of making sure that everybody at every level understands what we're trying to achieve, whether it's in government, private sector also need to leverage opportunities. But there's also the whole idea of the willingness of Africa to work together. Sometimes it's competition rather than complementarity. Right. Do you think that is changing now?
You see, the sad thing that regional integration is not a zero-sum game. It is not you lose, I win, or vice versa. I think we need to walk out of that space into the space of we can both win by working together. I think the feeling that somehow if we cooperate, my businesses will do better than yours is completely wrong. And I think we can prove that both with evidence of what has happened when countries have come together. I understand issues of national sovereignty, I understand issues of sensitivities, but those issues are secondary to the primary interest of the African people and the continent.
Do you think we understand that, or do you believe that governments and Africans themselves are starting to believe that?
Actually, I think the people are far ahead of the leaders. But in this case, the leaders have to lead. Leading means you take tough decisions. You must have the courage to say, this thing matters for this and the future generations. Now, I have a feeling that the business people, the young generations are far ahead on this. I once said, look, you find African talent on Wall Street. Why are they not here? I would like to see African talent circulating around the African continent, because that is a win-win for everyone. In fact, we have just completed a study in the bank, which we did. I happen to be chair of the Global Council for Africa at the World Economic Forum. And one of my colleagues in the team is leading this work. It's fantastic. You can see the obstacles, you can see the lost opportunities, and you could see what can be done at such a low cost, low threat to anyone, which at the same time will enable Africa to benefit.
Talking about the African people, and it's uplifting that you say you do believe they understand this and they're actually ahead of the leaders. What do you believe needs to be done to really tap the potential of the young people across the continent? What advice would you give African governments?
I would say the following. At the moment, Africa is at a turning point. And I would say the following things will be critical. The first one is the demographic dynamics. Will be a much more populous continent, younger, and people will be living mainly in urban areas, in the cities, in small towns, more than we are today. That's number one. Number two, will be a continent able to do some leapfrogging on the technology side. Look at the mobile revolution. Third, will be a continent able to take advantage of the current shifts in the global economic structures. But for that to happen, we have to come together. And so I would say to the leaders, these things don't wait. These are trends which are out there, but you have to read them properly and understand how to take advantage of them. Because if we did not do that, the so-called demographic dividend will become a deficit, will become a waste.
A threat?
It happened to Latin America. Asia in the 1970s, 80s, many countries saw this coming and they invested in education, in the skills of this booming population. Latin America missed the highway and they're still paying the price. Now, we have something to learn from, and I'm happy that I'm beginning to sense an understanding that this is where the future lies.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
As an African and as a leader, I want to look at your personal journey for a moment and your involvement in the reconstruction of Rwanda as finance minister, coming in and taking a look at, you know, the post-genocide situation. How do you bring a country together? How do you rebuild? What were you feeling, Donald, in Rwanda when you were at the helm and you were sitting there with your team and under the president with this huge task ahead of you?
First of all, I was honored to be given that responsibility at the time. I was one of the many hundreds of Rwandans who returned back home to rebuild our country. So it was very much a collective piece of work. But I think if you're looking for a manual of how to reconstruct a country, it does not exist. There's no science, there is no manual out there. You have to get the basics right. And the first basic to get right, if you want to reconstruct a country, is to build the trust. Build the trust between the people and the government.
Build the trust.
Build the confidence. You see, if you build the trust, whether it's access to education, to basic care, then people will understand that this journey will be long, but we're in it together. But if you fail to build the trust at the beginning, the journey will be more complex. So I think that under the leadership we had, everything we tried to do was build the trust, build the transparency, show people where we're going, tell people how hard it will be, and explain their own role in so doing. So in my particular portfolio, which I was given, I quickly understood that we had to manage carefully every dollar we were receiving, both from the people and from the partners. We had to show that we know exactly where we are going. We had to show that it's a country which is rebuilding itself, but has a direction. So I want to say to you, whether it was rebuilding the system of justice, whether it is the economy, whether it was social sectors, we have to build the trust with the people, a bond, a social compact, which enables things to happen.
Because in building a trust, you get their commitment and the engagement, the full engagement.
Precisely, Julie, you get their commitment, their involvement, and their understanding of the challenges, and they become part of the solutions.
Looking at many challenges we have across Africa, continuing challenges, although we are becoming increasingly, more democratic and transparent nations, what do you think are the biggest mistakes that we've made? What are the greatest lessons that we can learn?
I would like to put it differently. What could we have done better? I think for far too long, Africa viewed itself from the prism of others. We got independence, we inherited democratic structures, the Westminster system, economic doctrines of other people. So you had countries which said they were Marxist in Africa, as Mwalimu Nyerere used to say, Marxism in an economy of cassava. We had countries following the so-called Washington consensus. So we failed to build our own understanding of our nations and our economies. Luckily, now we know better. If you look at this G20, the countries around the table, 85% of the global economy, have reached where they are from different beginnings and different paths. They did not come there through one model. As I was saying, the wealth in Cape Town, some have come there through laissez-faire capitalism. others through state capitalism, others through welfare capitalism, others by muddling through learning from their own mistakes. So I think what we could have done would be to set out on a journey understanding who we are, where we want to go, and then learn from our own mistakes. I like to say in the bank that we thought development has a lift, an escalator. No, development does not happen that way. It is stairs, up the stairs, hard work. You sweat, but by the time you're up there, your feet, instead of looking for easy ways up, because they don't exist. So I think at the moment, what we like to do is to say, we know where we want to go. There are so many lessons out there. You can't import them. We can learn from them. But above all, let us learn from our own experience.
So authenticity. We find our own way. We learn the lessons from others. We see what's gone on, but we find our own way and craft our own journey.
Well, authenticity was Mobutu's way of explaining things. I don't like that.
You don't like that word?
I think that it's more like learn by doing.
Okay.
You know, a great Chinese leader used to say that what makes a nation is A, stability, a sense of pride, and learn by doing. He used to say, you cross the river by feeling the stones. He used to say, it does not matter whether the cat is white or black, as long as it catches the mice. So if we can create stability in our countries, which comes from trust, if you can create a sense of pride in who we are and learn by doing, I think everything is possible.
Let's talk about, we're going to go to your message to the Africans watching the show just before we close the interview. But first, I want you to tell the continent, what projects are you most excited about right now under your docket? What should they be keeping an eye on?
Well, the list is so long, but planning is making sure that you can prioritize. In the portfolio I'm holding now, which is the African Development Bank, I want to focus on those things which will make this African momentum in the 21st century sustainable. And it can be sustained by so many things. But I just want to pick one. And that is the one you asked me. The African Development Bank was established to be a bank of economic integration, bring African economies together. Not politically, that is another agenda. I hope one day it happens. But to ensure that this market is one. Can you imagine that today this is an economy of $2 trillion, African economies, 2 trillion. In 2000, it was 600 billion. But we're 54 countries. We're sitting on almost $500 billion of reserves. But we're investing them on Wall Street, in Europe, getting pittance. Just imagine if a small portion of those resources were used internally as an investment, not as a gift, to try and make this market function. So I have launched a project in the bank. We're calling it Africa 50. Now, Africa 50 is about, we're 50 years old as a continent. We have another journey of 50 years to go forward, when we'll be the most populous continent on earth. Now, how do we get there? Let us begin by mobilizing our own resources, investing them in make sure that market actually comes about. So we are launching Africa 50. We discussed in Marrakesh with the governors. We have been explaining to our leaders how to work. We'll be meeting with the African Union and the regional economic communities in Tunis next month to go through this vehicle, which will be intended to build Africa's transformative infrastructure in energy, connectivity, maritime ports, and so on. So for me, that is the one project I'm really committed to get done now.
Africa at 50. Finally, your message to Africans watching. Please look into the camera. What would you want to tell them about the potential of the continent and the role that they can play in transforming Africa?
Actually, I'll go back to where we began. This is a very exciting time in the continent, but nothing is preordained. It will require all of us to put our hands on deck. So get your hand on deck.
Get your hands on deck. Chip in. Do something. Thank you so much, Donald. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
Are you feeling challenged? I certainly hope you are. There's plenty to be done right across the continent, and regional integration and infrastructure development is key. Right now, let's take a look at your views on the issues.
This week, we asked you, in your own view, what should African governments do in order to record improvement in their economies? Karita Jonathan says, good governance, adoption and complete implementation of sound constitution and proper structuring of relevant institutions. Enrique Maigua says, create market for our vast resources and invest in our infant industries to compete in a world economic scale.
To take part in our weekly hangouts, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues. On Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues. On Twitter, @AfricaLD.
On Africa's Top 10 this week, we feature the richest countries according to their GDP. This is according to the International Monetary Fund statistics of April 2013. Starting our countdown at number 10 is Ghana with a GDP of $89.5 billion. Ghana stands at number 76 globally. At number 9 is Libya with a GDP of $94.5 billion. It stands at position 75 globally. Oil revenues and a small population gives Libya one of the highest GDPs per person in Africa. At number 8 is Tunisia with a GDP of $111.4 billion. It stands at position 69 globally. Tunisia was the first Mediterranean country to sign an association agreement with the European Union. Ethiopia is ranked at number 7 and has the biggest economy in East Africa in terms of GDP. The Ethiopian economy is one of the fastest growing in the world. It boasts of a GDP of $111.8 billion and is ranked 68th globally. Agriculture accounts for almost 41% of the GDP. Angola is at number 6 with a GDP of $138.5 billion and it stands at position 63 globally. Angola is one of the fastest growing economies in the world and is now China's largest supplier of oil. Morocco comes in at number 5 with a GDP of $181.9 billion. It's ranked at position 59 globally. Morocco is the world's third largest producer of phosphorus, and price fluctuations on the international market greatly influence its economy. In the Arab world, Morocco has the second largest non-oil GDP following Egypt. At number 4 is Algeria with a GDP of $286.6 billion. The fossil fuels energy sector is the backbone of Algeria's economy, accounting for roughly 60% of the budget revenues, 30% of GDP, and over 95% of export earnings. Nigeria stands at number 3 with a GDP of $488.1 billion. They are ranked 30th globally. Nigeria is currently the 50th largest export market for US goods and the 14th largest exporter of goods to the US. At number 2 is Egypt with a GDP of $559.8 billion. They are ranked at position 26 globally. The country has a highly developed economy boasting of a developed energy market based on coal, oil, natural gases, and hydropower. And ranking at number 1 is South Africa with a GDP of $608.8 billion. It lies at position 25 globally. South Africa is the largest producer and consumer on the continent. The country is a popular tourist destination and a substantial amount of revenue comes from tourism. That's Africa's Top 10 this week.
Time now to end the show, and of course we always have a quote. This week what we're doing is we're taking an African proverb. This, we are told, is a Hausa proverb, and it's very simple. When the music changes, so does the dance. Well, the music in Africa is certainly changing. The question is, are we as Africans determining the beat that we are going to dance to? I leave you with that thought. Blessings to you and blessings to Africa. See you next week.